Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin, and the illustrious James Junkin.
Roll Tide. Roll Tide. It's not the year we envisioned, but hey, that's my team, baby. That's where I'm from. But today we're here to talk about my friends at Veriforce.
Okay, let's talk about Veriforce. Before we get started with our show, everybody knows that we're powered by Veriforce, but who is sponsoring us today?
Well, today we have a new sponsor, and it is the Certified Environmental Responsible Contractor Program, or by the acronym CERC. Now, what is CERC? That's a certification program administered by the environmental risk professionals. And this certification promotes environmental responsible contractors by helping them stand out from their lesser qualified competition and win more bids. So contractors can become CERC certified by establishing an environmental risk management training plan and securing true pollution coverage. This is an opportunity to show your clients you are the better choice from your competition. So you can get certified by submitting the Veriforce certification request form on the CERC website. Veriforce Network members receive 20% off the $750 certification. So to learn more about this certification and how to become a certified environmental responsible contractor, visit veriforcenetwork.com/offers/environmental-risk-professionals. Welcome, CERC.
Welcome. So, James, today we're going to talk about the good, well, not the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay. You and I both follow the news. I don't know if I'd consider us news junkies, but we're aware of things that are going on, at least in our sphere of work, professionalism. And there was an incident down in Deer Park, Texas, that involved H2S. And I'd like to talk about that. Admittedly, H2S is not my area of expertise. I mean, I know a little bit about it as an industrial hygienist, but this was, as you put it to me earlier, a systematic failure of epic proportions. So can you give me a little information on that for our listeners?
This incident harkens me back to another incident that was similar in 2017 I was part of. 2 dead, 4 in the hospital due to an H2S release. In this incident, which happened in early October, in the industrial suburb of Deer Park, Texas, you had a catastrophic hydrogen sulfide release at the Pemex operated oil refinery there that resulted in 2 workers being killed and over 35, I think at the last count, others were injured. The community sheltered in place. There was immediate public concern, and really this underscores a lot of what we've been talking about here recently, which is in the downstream chemical plants and refineries in which we work, how process safety is paramount, and having a system in place that is resilient, that can absorb errors, particularly human errors, is essential to preventing incidents like this. So, you know, our thoughts and prayers at Veriforce, and mine and yours individually, go out to all the families that are impacted, because like you and I have said numerous times on this podcast, nobody goes to work to die. Nobody.
That's right. You know, what's striking about this incident, and I think you kind of alluded to this, is that, you know, a procedure probably was in place of some sort, and the procedure probably either wasn't followed or there wasn't redundant systems. But in any case, the workers were injured, and I'm going to say probably for a lack of knowledge and lack of controls to stop what was going on in their workplace. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's an accurate assessment. You know, if we want to take a little bit closer look at this incident, a lot of more details will come out after the investigation by OSHA. The Chemical Safety Board is on site. And one thing I've learned about incidents is, kind of back to my military training, is the first reports are unreliable, right? We need to wait for the Chemical Safety Board to complete their investigation, for OSHA to complete their investigation. But at the onset, this accident occurred during maintenance operations on a flange. And it had a pipe that was connected that was critical to the plant's infrastructure. So in that maintenance on the flange by contractors, somehow the H2S escaped and got into the environment and immediately, killed 2 contractor workers, injuring 35 others. Evidently, this incident and release went on for as much as 12 hours. They couldn't get the isolation down. The residents panicked. They were told to stay indoors, shelter in place and all that. So we're not really yet right where we need to be with knowing all that went on in this incident, but we can make some assumptions.
Okay. Then just for the listeners, this what you're describing in oil and gas is what's called a line break, right?
I am assuming that what they were doing at the time was completing a line break. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, process lines, pipes, are joined together by flanges and joints, right? And it's very common to do maintenance on these pipes during this time of the year. You routinely see, particularly in the South, the late summer, early fall, while the weather is good, before we get into the rainy seasons and all that, maintenance turnarounds. Now in the South, we call them turnarounds. In the North, they call them outages, but these are extended maintenance periods where you have thousands of contractor workers coming into a facility to perform work. Don't know that 100%. I could be completely wrong, but it's that time of year, right? When you have contractors inside a facility. So to do a line break, all that means is we're loosening the bolts on the flange to separate the pipe. Typically what occurs is some sort of energy isolation, lockout, tag out, double blocking and bleeding off of process lines, right? Somewhere along this line, somebody missed an energy isolation point. So when you did that line break, contractors probably assumed that they were protected from whatever this deadly gas, H2S, wherever it was coming from. Now, I've experienced this, and we've talked extensively about this. And when citations come down, I guarantee you they're going to be cited under the respiratory protection standard, right? And, I am a huge proponent of reading the standard. And many times we don't read the standard and it results in tragedies like this. And there are particular parts that we've talked about in respiratory protection on this podcast related to these unknown atmospheres, right? What is an
IDLH?
Absolutely.
Immediately dangerous to life and health.
So if we're out there and we are going to do a line break, we as the contractor that's performing this work has to have a process in place to verify what is inside of that process line, right? Bring it up here so we can discuss it. But in this particular sentence, in these paragraphs, lay life and death for contractors. So let me bring it up here so I give you the right citation. And respiratory protection is one that we often go to the standard. We look at the standard. We say, where does it say I need to be fit tested? Where do I say that it needs to be, clean shaven or whatever? and we don't read the entire standard, and it's dangerous for you. If you do not read the entire standard in its context, you can miss important things. So I found the paragraph. It's 1910-134 D1, 3 little i's, right? The employer shall identify and evaluate the respiratory hazards in the workplace. This evaluation shall include a reasonable estimate of employee exposures to respiratory hazards and an identification of contaminants' chemical state and physical form. Where the employer cannot identify or reasonably estimate the employee exposure, the employer must 100% of the time consider the atmosphere to be IDLH. So
James, let me ask you. I mean, H2S, that's pretty common, isn't it? In a plant facility that's doing oil and gas, right? H2S is a big thing. I mean, monitoring for that, wouldn't there have been monitoring in place? I mean, I know we're kind of armchair
let's talk
quarterbacking
about
it, but
monitoring here, okay, in the context of this particular paragraph. So there's this big misconception that monitoring is protection. Monitoring is not protection. Monitoring is not protecting you. You can be just as dead with your foregas going off, right? Monitor. So I hear this all the time. I gave them a monitor. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're protected. There's nothing in this paragraph that talks about monitoring. Now, there's atmospheric monitoring that goes on in confined space, and it's alluded to in this. So it says you have to identify and evaluate the respiratory hazards in the workplace. So this goes back to something we've been harping on for years. Hazards are best controlled in the planning of the work. Now, we don't know whether they knew that H2S may be present. I'm assuming they did because it's pretty common in refinery and downstream operations.
That's kind of what I was getting at with the monitoring. Like they would know.
Upstream operations, right? In full disclosure, I sit on the ANSI Z390.1 committee that just issued the new training standard just a few months before for accepted training practices across industries. Hydrogen sulfide is very commonly found in the oil and gas industry. And you can work safely around hydrogen sulfide if you follow the processes. Now, there already been litigation filed on this.
Bet.
I listened to the plaintiff's attorney this morning that's representing some of the workers that were injured. And he stated it's always the failure to follow procedures. If you're going to work around these deadly gases, you have to follow procedure. Now, I don't know if he's correct or not. We haven't seen all
to the T though. I mean, when we're talking about procedures, I mean, there's redundancy in PSM, right? There's redundancy in procedures for all kinds of things, including line breaks in a facility of this nature. Is that correct?
That's correct. So somewhere along the line, the isolation didn't occur. I guarantee you in this incident, when we read the incident report from the CSB, words like I thought, I assumed, I was told are going to be included in the witness statements from the people that were involved in this incident. Okay? So it really goes back to understanding this respiratory protection requirement and understanding how that fits in with training and a lot of other things, right? So we're talking about this standard says the employer, in this case, it's whoever the contractor that passed away, their employer, right? And we could spend 2 episodes talking about multi-employer citations, and that's going to happen in this, right? But in this instance, the employer is responsible for identifying the respiratory hazards in the workplace. This evaluation must include a reasonable estimate of employee exposures to those hazards. Reasonable is a legal term, right? What steps, what measures were taken? If I was investigating this, the first questions I'd be asking is, what steps did you take to identify what was in that particular pipe. So if we did a line break on that flange, and again, we're making a lot of assumptions here, we can't verify what's in it. So how can we make a reasonable assessment? If we're monitoring outside the pipe, then and the pipe and flange are doing what they're supposed to be doing, then we should add 0 reading because we've got a mechanical integrity, right? If we don't, we got a bigger problem. But when I break that flange, I'm encountering that atmosphere. So what atmosphere? Obviously, it was a deadly gas atmosphere. There was no way to reasonably estimate what was in it, or our estimation was faulty. The assumptions we made were wrong. The standard says that you have to consider that atmosphere to be IDLH. So
So I
those
was
guys
reading,
should have been under air. If they had done a line break and they'd have been under air, they may not have perished. Now, it's astounding that this was a large enough release that 35 people were injured.
yeah.
That's pretty significant.
I was reading some line break procedures because, as I said, this is not my area of expertise. This is yours. But I was kind of, before we got on the air, was reading some line break procedures. And it did talk a lot about IDLH, these procedures, and the use of PPE, aka respiratory protection, supplied air, when doing these because of this particular hazard.
So this is a training issue and it's a procedure issue. So when I look at this from afar, but having done this a long time, including multiple fatality investigations, what I estimate you're going to find is some of the causal factors is this. Number one, somebody did not perform the appropriate lockout tagout. That's a training issue, right? And I want to talk about training issues related to this. Respiratory protection training, lockout tagout training, and H2S training. And we're super passionate. You're with me on the Veriforce Strategic Advisory Board. You and I work together all the time. We've helped develop some of these courses. When we talk about training, there are a lot of things out there that are particularly e-learning modules that contractors are encouraged to use that are limited in training time, 25 minutes, 20 minutes. And look, sometimes e-learning can be used. But when we're talking about life and death here, let's get serious. Everybody was talking about serious injuries and fatalities and potential serious injuries and fatalities and how to prevent them. Let's start with what we're actually training our workers. Does anybody think 20 minutes online training is enough to wear an SCBA or to understand the complexities of lockout tagout? I just assessed a contractor the other day that did 2 minutes and 56 seconds of lockout tagout training. We're going to turn that person loose inside a chemical processing plant and then look at ourselves and say, we care about these people and safety is our number one, value and all that stuff. Put the platitudes aside and let's talk about where you put your money where your mouth is.
Shame on you. Shame on you, right?
So in incidents like this, it's always a systematic failure. And part of those failures relate to training. So training in this sense, lockout, tagout, energy isolation training. If I was investigating this, I would not only want to see the certificate, I want to see the training program.
Damn right. I agree with you, James. There are a lot of times when, and even on the things that you and I have worked on together, that, we see a training certificate, it's signed by somebody, who the heck knows? There's no name printed underneath.
Nobody can diagnose till we get to the depositions to figure out who Crooked Line is.
And then you ask to see the PowerPoint and it never materializes, or you ask to see the content, the agenda, never materializes. And this is a systemic problem, I think, throughout a lot of industries, not just the oil and gas industry, but a lot of industries.
So lockout, tagout, energy isolation. I've always said I never want to be the energy isolation lockout tagout coordinator for a plant during a turnaround activity. Man, you talk about a huge job right there, verifying that all this stuff is done. So part of it's process, but let's start with training. What are we training our workers? If I'm a hiring client and I've got people coming into my plant to perform lockout, tag out, to walk behind operators, to walk these things down, understand human beings can make mistakes, I want to know what kind of training do they have. That's why we developed this competency-based training at Veriforce. So you can be confident in the qualifications of the instructor. You can be confident in the training program that is going to meet the regulation, and that there's a knowledge, skills, and abilities assessment after that. So we can verify that this person didn't just sit there, they learned something and they carried it forward.
Are they proficient? Can they demonstrate what they learned? Quite honestly, I'm not sure you can get that from a straight up online training. I think you have to hybrid at least part of it with an instructor who's knowledgeable in presenting and evaluating those skills.
Well, that's why on the ANSI committee, for something as critical as H2S, we insist on instructor-led training. Okay? We insist on it. Now, ANSI is not the law. It is a recommended practice. But this recommended practice has stood the test of time, made up by some really smart, very experienced safety professionals that work with H2S. And you need to have effective H2S training. As a hiring client, I want to know that they have had effective H2S training. So several years ago at Veriforce, this topic came up. Do we need to create an H2S training course that is compliant with ANSI 390.1, which is the accepted practice H2S training standard I've been referring to? Because the master trainer group at Veriforce felt very strongly we should do this, because everywhere we go, we would talk about, do you have H2S training? You get, oh, I got the 30-minute online training, or I've watched a 45-minute video, or I watched the really cool video Left Undone. It's great video, but that's not training. That's supplemental to training, right? So we felt like we ought to develop a course, H2S Clear for Energy, that met all the elements of the ANSI Z390 standard, including train the trainer for the person who's going to be delivering this, a 3 to 4 hour minimum class time, and a listing of all the topics that have to be included inside H2S training, right? And, the evidence, as it appears, I guarantee you, is going to show a lapse in training in lockout, tagout, respiratory protection, and dealing with IDLH unknown atmospheres in H2S training. I guarantee you that's going to be a part of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, what a tragedy, right? I mean, I go back, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? But again, I want to hear it from you. Planning or hazards are
best controlled in the design and planning of the work.
Right. And if you don't want that final garnish to be something that the worker does because he didn't understand, he or she didn't understand, or didn't take a proficiency test on, or didn't ask a question, or didn't get trained on, you don't want that final garnish to result in something like this.
And I don't know this to be true, and I'm not making a moral judgment about PMEX and its people there. Nobody goes to work to kill contractors, right? These are systems failures, things that are obvious after the incident, right? But there are going to be precursors. You're going to find, most likely, near misses, things that happened in the beginning. So when you're managing contractors in this number, you need to start out with a good contractor pre-qualification program. But that's not the end of it. Pre-qualification is not qualification. It's not continued. It's what you submitted at a point in time.
It's
Right?
what you continue to do and what you continue to improve on is where the rubber meets the road.
So if I'm managing contractors inside these outages and turnarounds, one, we want them pre-qualified. We want to know, do they have policies, procedures? Do they have these things in place? Do they have an experienced track record of working safely? Do they train their workers? And some sort of verification process of that particular training. That's why I love standardized training, because
I
I
was
take
just
it
going to
right
say,
back to the person who taught you.
it's not enough to just train. It's very important to be standardized so that everyone is on the same page.
Absolutely. Then, after all these things that we do, we have a system that's resilient. We use resilient engineering. We seek to control hazards in the design phase of the work. We've conducted process hazard analyses to try to identify our risk and stuff. At the end, when all that fails, you need to have an advanced emergency response strategy. You have got to defend the fence line. Okay? When it gets outside the fence line, you're in the community. And there's a lot of misinformation. They don't know. They don't understand the characteristics of H2S. The media knows even less. You need a communication strategy. Evidently, this event went on for hours, and hours and hours. So this should happen in your planning, right? In your planning process as part of your safety management system. It's not just enough to say, well, our emergency action plan has, these are the exits, here's where we muster, wind direction, move, crossways and upwind, and all these things are important. But it goes.
How are we going to contain it? How are we going to contain it? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to, God forbid something like this happens again, right? But in hindsight, hours and hours and hours of release, you have to think that if you had planned for that, again, here comes the risk register, right? You have your risk register and you have a bunch of things on it, and that probably is a low, well, it's a high severity, low probability, right? So it probably lands low on the risk register, but you still must account for what you're going to do if it happens, right? You might not be able to eliminate that from your risk register, but if it's on there, you better be looking at it.
So I encourage everyone that's listening to us to consider what we've talked about today, which is we need good processes, right? We need employees to understand how to do their jobs and how to do their jobs safely, particularly around these critical functions of respiratory protection, energy isolation, and dealing with H2S. I encourage you to have a standardized training program like the ones we put out at Veriforce in order for you to understand what that certificate and card means.
And that they mean the same thing from student to student to worker to student to worker, right?
Absolutely. So I'm assured that this certificate I get is not 2 minutes and 56 seconds of lockout tagout training. It's not 12 minutes of H2S training. It's real.
Not a video.
Not a video with no knowledge, skills, and abilities assessment. Having competent contractors is important because we have a lot of turnover right now. There are a lot of experienced hands that have left, and we've talked about this on the podcast, right? Yeah. How that we've got this great generational change. So a lot of experience is left, and you're seeing a rise in these incidents because inexperienced workers that are moderately or poorly trained are performing critical tasks in plants with highly hazardous chemicals. So that again, I'm not making a moral judgment here about the plant. the people that work at the plant, the contractor, employer, or anybody. We don't know enough information. But these things can happen to anybody when you don't have a system in place that has barriers and defenses that's resilient. So,
amen. Amen. So James, this is a big thing. I can't wait to see what the CSB comes up with. What the CSB usually comes out with is pretty comprehensive. I encourage anybody who's interested in looking at similar things or incidents that cause fatalities or serious injuries to go to these chemical safety board findings, and read through these, because you can learn quite a lot about not only accident investigation, incident investigation. You can learn about what people are missing and what the hot points are. And as James says, again, no moral judgment. We don't know what happened, but we can surmise that there are going to be some things that come out of this that are going to be pretty serious. So,
and I make that summation based on past instances and a failure to learn, a failure for us to learn from others' tragedies. So anyway, look, this is not a commercial, but I'm a master trainer at Veriforce. We have standardized training programs for respiratory protection, lockout, tagout,
really good training,
and H2S. And this H2S program meets the training standard of the ANSI Z390.1 committee that just issued the new standard in 2024. So if you're interested in that, learning more about it, reach out to me or reach out to training sales at veriforce.com. They can give you all the information that you want, or just visit veriforce.com and check out some of our training programs.
Yeah. Now listen, James, we got a ton of listeners, but I'd love some more, right? So if you like what we do, tell a friend, tell your mama, tell your daddy, tell your friends, tell everyone to come and listen to the Risk Matrix, because we talk about some topics that are really timely. And we talk to some people who are deep in the trenches of the things that matter when it comes to safety, risk, the workforce, etc. So if you like what we do, I would like you to like our page, like Veriforce YouTube, hit subscribe. If you don't want to watch us on video, which some people don't, you can go to Spotify. We're also on Spotify, so you can do the same thing there. If you like and you subscribe, every Tuesday around noontime, you're going to get a drop of our show. And we're on number, as of this taping, 67 or 68. So we're going to hit 100 soon, James. We're going to turn 100.
We're going to turn 100. We're going to have an all-time
we should have a party.
Greatest podcast.
The best of
400. Best of. That'll be fantastic. That'll be fantastic. But look, we also you have access to all that library of podcasts. We've had some outstanding guests come on and share their experiences. Recently, those that are working in the downstream part of the oil and gas industry and refineries and chemical plants that have led up to this particular episode right here. We've talked about other industries. We've talked about Safety 1, Safety 2. We've talked about
procurement.
Exactly. So, hey, check us out with what's in the library. Go back to check out the titles. If there's an episode that particularly interests you in the title, you can start right there.
That's right. So thanks again for listening. And James, take us out.
Hey, thank you for what you do as safety professionals to bring workers home safe from high hazard jobs. Y'all keep doing that. Until next time, roll tide.
Roll tide.